Well, Shabbat Shalom. I'm going to go ahead and open in prayer. So, Father, we just thank you for this Shabbat. We thank you for the day of rest. We thank you that we're stepping into a new portion of the Torah today. We thank you for the story, the deliverance, the what all the book of Exodus encapsulates, getting to know you better, your name, your heart, your desire for your people. So, Lord, as we start to dive into this, I ask again that you would give us revelation of what we're reading and even passages that connect our heart that we can say, yeah, we see the Lord's deliverance and his sovereignty in my life based on what he's done for the Hebrews. And I ask this in Yeshua's name. Amen. So I had asked Emma if I could do this portion because this is my birth portion, and I've never gotten to teach my birth portion before. So this is kind of exciting. And in case any of you don't know what your birth, how many people know what their birth portion is? Hands? Okay. If you don't, there is a site, it's hebcal.com, basically hebrewcalendar.com. And you can plug in your birth date and whether you're born in the morning and the evening, and it can tell you what Torah portion was being read or studied when you were born. So it's pretty cool. And so, yeah, it's kind of, because of the way the calendar lands, no, my birthday isn't today, but this is my birth portion. So
When is your birthday?
my birthday's Friday.
Friday.
Mm-hmm. And then I had to sit in my mind and recalculate how old I was again. 16, there you go. Actually, my kids used to say, what was it, 20, Mom, you look 29, and I'd say, bless you, go get yourself a treat or whatever. So,
16 pretty much put me in jail, wouldn't
that's
it?
true. I can't do 16. Pretty much. So, we'll go ahead and dive in. And we're in Exodus chapter 1. And I find it interesting, of course, how these parashat names are. Parashat Shemot, which actually means names. And it's only because they list off the names of the tribes at the very beginning of it. But we're dealing with the oppression in Egypt. And true to course for me, we're actually starting in Genesis 50, because the two of them, at the very end of Genesis, it wraps up that Joseph died. In the very beginning of Exodus, it wraps up that Joseph died. But I want to look at what Joseph said to the people to kind of get a foretaste of what we're stepping into now. So when you look at Genesis chapter 50, I'm going to read verses 22 through 26. So Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived to 110 years old. Joseph saw the third generation of Ephraim's sons. Also the sons of Machir, Manasseh's sons, were born upon Joseph's knees. So he got to see grandkids, great-grandkids. I mean, this is all pretty cool. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will surely take notice of you and bring you up from the land to the land that he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then Joseph made Israel's sons swear an oath, saying, when God takes notice of you, you will bring my bones up from here. So Joseph died at 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. So when he died, there was something very specific he asked his brothers to do. And we kind of touched on this last week, does it matter where you're buried? And, because Jacob was like, bury me with my fathers. But this was going to be a long wait to move Joseph's bones. And they didn't do it immediately. And I think we've kind of kicked around the idea that, well, Joseph was revered by the people, right? He had saved them. So he was embalmed and kept in Egypt rather than being buried with his fathers in their place. But a lot of that has to do with the fact that how would that appear to the Egyptians? If he was over them, they loved him, and then his brothers were to say, yeah, but we're going to move him away from here. And there's that dynamic of, I think that would have been an insult to the Egyptian people to say, we know that he was raised here, we know that he delivered you, we know that he saved you, but you guys aren't good enough for us to bury him here. We're going to take him somewhere else. Because I really believe the Egyptians identified him as an Egyptian leader, not as a Hebrew shepherd. So he was embalmed, which is, I think Jacob was the first one to get embalmed. That's not normally a Jewish practice. But he was embalmed, which is probably a good thing because his body wasn't going to get moved for a long time, right? So,
They were in exile for 430 years. And
yeah.
There's been part of that there, so
It's part of that, yeah.
approximately 400 years.
And he was 110 when he died, so we're talking 300 years before they moved him, right? And so we've got Joseph there, and we have Joseph promising him, you'll move me. But the other thing that Joseph promised him or prophesied to these people was basically that God is going to remember you. He's going to take notice of you, and he's going to bring you out of the land to the land that he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, he told this to his remaining family members at that point in time, but we still see this hope and this promise that Joseph knew, you guys aren't going to stay here. And he's telling them that right before he dies, you will be moved. So now we're in our Torah portion. And when we start in verse 6, it says, then Joseph died, as did all his brothers and all the generations. Now remember, 70 came in, but it says, yet Bnei Israel was fruitful, increased abundantly, multiplied, grew extremely numerous, so the land was filled with them. So we go in 70, and now we're this huge, huge, huge group of people. And when you hear this line, because this is what I love about Exodus, as I'm reading through this, I see Genesis chapter 1 and Exodus chapter 1. You see the same verbiage being used. You see the same creation language being discussed in here. So it says here that they were being fruitful. So what does that make you think of?
Genesis.
Uh-huh.
Fruitful, multiply.
Correct. In Genesis 1:28, they're supposed to be fruitful, multiply. And I love the fact that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Even though they're not in the land, part of the be fruitful and multiply and fill the land didn't only mean only do that when you're in this little cluster of land. They're being fruitful and they're multiplying. And the fact that God's blessing on them becomes, of course, a problem for Pharaoh. And thinking throughout history, and I had written this down, it says, it appears when the Jewish people are prospering, jealousy or fear arises amongst those around them. If Israel's called to be a blessing to the nations, why would this happen? If they're doing what they're supposed to do, why are they such a threat?
Because Satan's involved.
Russ?
Because the other nations would have found that there were too many of them, that they could easily overcome them.
So it would seem like realities of maybe where God's blessing is a blessing to a person, but to those around them, they can grow really fearful out of somebody being blessed. And throughout this whole time of also reading this, I was doing a lot of parallels to the Holocaust. There was so many little signs of the destruction of the Jewish people for no other reason than they were blessed and they were prospering. But when they're blessed and they're prospering, blessed by God and prospering, people become fearful of them, but they're supposed to be a blessing to the nations. And so that we've got this dichotomy going on here there. Now that obviously, okay, we see over and over and over again, like we'll see in this chapter, where Satan tries to kill the seed, because it's all about the seed of where it's supposed to come through. And we see as the seed expands, is blessed, and does what it's supposed to do, the nations and the enemy try to shut that down. Okay, if they're going to become a nation and they're doing what they're supposed to do, well, we don't want them to take it to the next step and do the other thing they're supposed to do, which is bless the nations and draw them onto God. So if we can't stop what's happening here, let's come at it from another angle and try to stop them at least from blessing the nations. And so throughout this, we see it appears that the current king of Egypt, of course, he didn't remember, and that's another thing. He did not remember that this Joseph was the one that saved their nation. Joseph was a blessing to their nation. But all he can see is this threat of this multiplication. Now, it doesn't say anywhere in this text that the Israelites, or the Hebrews at that time, it doesn't say anything that they were planning war against these people, they were fighting against these people. They were just doing what they were supposed to do. They're multiplying and they're spreading in the land. And now we see this super paranoid king of Egypt thinking, they're going to get too big and they're going to overrun us, right? Yeah.
So isn't the element of that also jealousy, which was one of the same reasons that Jesus was crucified, was the jealousy of the scribes and Pharisees. So they were also jealous, to me, of the prosperity that the Hebrews were having in their land.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not so sure that would be even a greater issue. I mean, that was part of the Holocaust too.
Yeah. Well, and they created scenarios because, like they did in the Holocaust, saying, well, the Jews rule everything, and the Jews. No, they didn't. But how do you work up a group of people to come against another group of people?
Lie.
Yeah, so we're going to see here, when we continue reading in this, so it says, now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph, so he didn't know the story, obviously didn't care.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like Esau in a way. Esau knew the story, but didn't care. Seems like this Pharaoh should have known the story. You'd think it had been passed on generation to generation.
Mm-hmm.
So it almost tells you more about him.
Yeah.
It's just his attitude and lack of appreciation for their history.
Yeah, and it had been a couple hundred years. We also have to remember that the pharaohs all believed that they were a god, right? So to think that this Hebrew people had somebody that had delivered a god probably is not something Pharaoh wanted to acknowledge either.
It would really, if I was Pharaoh, it would really chat my behind to find out that I owed my prosperity to somebody else, that it wasn't me.
Mm-hmm. True. Chapter behind.
But it would seem that like the Jewish people, as throughout history, they're out of step. Wherever they're out of step with the local religions, the local customs, local government, and they have to be kind of sequestered off in Goshen, apart from the Egyptians. And the Egyptians were bothered that you get a nation of largely shepherds, and that they're not following like the Egyptian religion, so they're living in the Egyptian land, but they're totally at odds with all of the way that things are done and expected to be done in that society. So I think that alone, I don't believe they were liked. Now, I'm sure Joseph was liked in the sense that he saved people from starvation. Millions of people were probably saved from starvation because of him, and so he certainly would have the respect, but it'd be difficult for me to believe that the Egyptians looked favorably upon the Jewish people as they were increasing in number. It's almost like, get them out of here, they're the reproach.
Well, they never looked favorably on them, because they wouldn't eat with them because they were shepherds. I mean, they basically one of the reasons they lived in Goshen, of course Goshen's where they prospered, but they weren't gonna mingle and live amongst the Egyptians because the Egyptians didn't like them from the get-go. I do not believe the Egyptians, though, looked and acknowledged and identified Joseph really as a Hebrew. He was dressed like an Egyptian, he looked like an Egyptian.
Yeah, Egyptian name, right, also, right, description.
Yeah, so he, you know, this is the guy that saved him, and we're gonna make an exception for this. And now we're gonna see this same dynamic where we've got Moses, who these people hate, that they want to once again, I mean, Pharaoh wants to kill the Hebrews, and again, we're gonna have a Hebrew living in the palace again, who looks like an Egyptian. I mean, his mama's Egyptian, you know he probably, well, we know he looked like an Egyptian because by the time he flees and Jethro's daughters see him, they're like, this Egyptian saved us at the well. So again, we have this, he couldn't have looked like a Hebrew in Pharaoh's palace. He looked like an Egyptian. So we've got this identity, like in a sense, a deliverer's identity being, his appearance being changed in order, you know, to be able to function in the role that he's functioning in. And so I think that's like, to me, it's just so cool how God will take a chosen deliverer, a chosen person, and he hides them amongst the group. And even though Yeshua wasn't hidden, they still didn't understand who he was. So in a sense, we see that his plans, he's almost hidden from his brothers. He's hidden from the Jews because they're expecting him to look differently. It's like, here now he comes looking like you, and you want him to look like this great deliverer, conqueror. They're never looking like what they expect them to look like. So it's like God places and hides deliverers in plain sight.
Yeah, just this week, this group I'm part of, we were reading where the Judeans, those in Jerusalem and so forth, did not realize that Yeshua was born in Bethlehem. They thought he was a Nazarite, he was a Galilean. So they were debating, saying, you know, the Messiah cannot come from Galilee. And so, and the fact that all the disciples, the apostles, Yeshua were from Galilee, apparently was part of that hiddenness that the Judeans, those that were living in Jerusalem in that area, did not recognize him as meeting the criteria for Messiah, at least in that perspective, as well as obviously looking for someone to be a son of David, connects all to that, as well as being one that would be the king figure, as opposed to someone that was more like the Joseph figure.
Yeah, and I'm glad you kind of brought that up because it's always like, can anything good come from Nazareth, right?
Right.
And again, we have this deliverer that's kind of set apart or looked as something less than the group they're with, you know, and so we still have this whole like fully not what they would have expected type of thing. And so how God uses that, which should bring us like a whole bunch of encouragement, right? That I don't have to have a PhD to facilitate a conversation with you guys. And inadequacy, honestly, was something I have battled with my whole life. I can't do this, I don't have this. I can't do this, I don't have this. I can relate to even Moses when he talks about, but I have a speech impediment. I can't speak in front of people. I can't speak in front of people. I have panic attacks. I mean, that's my reality. And God bless my husband, because he can vouch to what his wife used to go through just to be able to do this. And so, yeah, I love how God takes these unique things about people and he's like, no, but I'm with you and you can do it. And we'll see that with this argument with Moses.
Yeah, but sometimes you get a PhD, you just get versed in the ways the flesh thinks and not the way God thinks. So that's pretty reasonable that God's not gonna take somebody who's got a PhD in years and years of study of getting your thought
Yeah, could be.
trained their way.
Mm-hmm. Stan always tells me that it has more to do with heart and passion over something rather than knowledge a lot of times. Like, I love the word. And like, that's why I was like so thrilled to do my birth portion. I was so, to be able to facilitate this. I love this. There's nothing I like talking about more than this, So to me, that love, that passion, draws me into wanting to study more. For my birthday, we have this habit that if we want a Christmas or birthday gift, we basically pick out what we want and go, guess what you bought me for my birthday? So I walked in the other day and I said, Stan, you bought me 2 books for my birthday. He's like, oh, well, happy birthday.
I have good taste, don't I?
Yeah.
Such a deal.
So I was like, and what are they? Oh, they're more books about Torah. Oh, okay. So found 2 more study guides. Yay!
Perfect.
So, so I got off topic, but we'll get back in this. So, starting at verse 8. Now there arose a new king over Egypt. He did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the people of Bnei Israel are too numerous and too powerful for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or else they will grow even more numerous, so that if war breaks out, they may join our enemies, fight against us, and then escape from the land. So I'm going to pause right there. First of all, verse 10, come, we must deal shrewdly with them. Does anybody know what that verse, dealing shrewdly, links to? Oh, good. Here's a little nugget. Here's something fun. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them. If we look at Genesis 3:1, but the serpent was shrewder than any animal in the field that Adonai had made. So he said to the woman, did God really say? That shrewd is the same shrewd that's being used. We are supposed to put a link between the serpent and Pharaoh here. It's the same way of a way to destroy the seed, a way to destroy God's purpose. The serpent was going to do it by what? Presenting doubts and lies to sever that relationship. Now here we have a Pharaoh who wants to destroy the seed, and he wants to deal shrewdly the same way in order to find a way to stop this blessing, to stop what God was doing. Whether he's aware of it or not, he's still doing it. And so it's not like he was like going through going, oh, let's see, how did the serpent deal with the, no, it wasn't that, but it's that same spirit, which is where, with that spirit that's on him, that's operating through him, that's where we can kind of connect when we later see this escalation of, in the debate of God hardened his heart. Well, did God take Pharaoh's free will? No, we're seeing right here from the very beginning this is a man that has evil intent in his heart. It was not going to take God much to keep this man on the path that he was on. And so when we see that, we want to link that same spirit that was in the serpent is the same spirit that's being operated in Pharaoh. So it says, so they set slave masters over them to afflict them with forced labor. So that word afflict there is anah. This is also a link back to Genesis 15:13. And that hardship, that affliction is, there is this, well, let's just read it. I'm going to go to Genesis 15 so I can better explain this and what's going on in my head. Starting in, I've got to get to the right chapter. Genesis 15:13. And God's talking to Abraham in this passage. It says, know for certain your seed will be strangers in the land that is not theirs, and they'll be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. But I'm going to judge the nations that they serve. Afterwards, they'll go out with many possessions. So again, this enslave and oppress, we have this affliction. We have this, they were already told this was going to happen. Like, this is such a fulfillment. This is approximately 400 years later, that exactly what God told Abraham is now being played out. They've been in this land almost 400 years. I keep looking at you, Jonathan, because you're really good with the numbers and we go like, was it 400 or was it 430 or was it, and so, but let's use the round number and say, okay, this is what they were told though. They're going to be in there a really long time. And now that this 400-year thing has come up, now we're looking at this action. And it seems like I've heard a lot of arguments on the, again with the Holocaust, like how did it go on so long? Why didn't God act? And then I've heard the things like, how could God leave these people in slavery for 400 years? Well, they really weren't in slavery for 400 years. They were out of the land for 400 years. It doesn't really seem to me like the heavy oppression and hardship hit until there was a Pharaoh that didn't know Joseph anymore. And which happened around the same time Moses was born. So at the same time that this heavy affliction is now happening, we see a deliverer born. God's timing is in this whole thing. So in this scripture, and this scripture gets referenced, just that one little promise here, and I'll read it again, knowing for certain your seed will be a stranger in a land that's not theirs. They will be enslaved, and they will be oppressed or afflicted for 400 years. Now that doesn't mean they're oppressed and afflicted for the 400, they were in the land for 400 years. It says, but I'm going to judge the nation that they will serve. So now we see that he's letting them know that when he breaks in, he's going to break in as a judge. And so we see God the judge in this big time. I'm a justice person. I'm a big justice person. So I love to see it when God rises up and it's like, okay, now we're going to take care of this situation. And that's kind of where we're at on this. So now let's talk about the midwives. I love this. Okay, so they had set slave masters over them, put them into forced labor, built storage cities for Pharaoh. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and the more they spread. So this wasn't working, right? So they worked them harshly. They made their lives bitter with hard labor, doing all sorts of works in the field. In their labors, they got even more cruel. This still wasn't working. So moreover, the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Sephora, and the other Puah, and said, when you help the Hebrew women during childbirth, look at the sex. If it's a son, then kill him. But if it's a daughter, she may live. Yet the midwives feared God, so they did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this? Let the boys live. And the midwives told Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women were not like the Egyptian women. They're like animals. They give birth before the midwives come to them. So God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied, growing very numerous. Because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. But Pharaoh charged his people, saying, you are to cast every son that is born into the river, but let every daughter live. So let's talk about the midwives. So first of all, Pharaoh orders the midwives to what? Kill off the seed.
Kill off the boys.
The boys. Why the boys? Why not the girls?
They wanted housemates. The girls could grow up to be housemates.
Yeah. Any other reason?
Like kill off the future army, you know?
Mm-hmm. Do what?
Doesn't the boy carry the seed?
The boy carries the seed. So, you know, yes, a lot of times we see whenever there was conquest, the men were killed, the women were taken, but I really believe in this has so much to do with killing off the seed. And the seed comes through the man. And so that directive of kill every male, make sure, you know, because, and it's gone back and forth of where a person's identity comes through, and I don't really want to do a deep dive into, like, are you Jewish because your mother was Jewish, or are you Jewish because your father was Jewish? Because they've gone back and forth on paternity versus maternity. You know, I don't really want to get into that. I just know that they talk about seed a lot in there, and the seed, this is coming through the men. So we're going to kill off the men. So here's another interesting debate. Were the midwives Hebrew?
Doesn't sound
It
like a
says,
Hebrew
verse
name.
15, they were.
Do
The
what?
second one doesn't sound like a Hebrew name. One could be Hebrew and the other could be something else. I mean, we don't really know.
In my translation, the ESV in verse 15, it says, then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives.
Okay.
But that adjective doesn't necessarily mean that they're Hebrew, it means that they're the midwives for the Hebrew women, is a possible interpretation of that.
Okay.
It's-
Yeah.
I think it's unlikely that they were Hebrew, especially given the way they talk later about the Hebrew women.
Yeah. Well, and, you know, we even saw, again, like, relating even back to the Holocaust, to ask people to put their own people to death is a little bit different than to ask people who already have a prejudice against those people to put them to death. The midwives, if they were Hebrew, would most likely want to save their people, not murder them. So why would Pharaoh go to Hebrews and ask them to do that? Because I'd read the same thing, that there's a real good chance that they were midwives to the Hebrews, not Hebrews. And this is another reason. When they came up before Pharaoh and he said, why did you do this? If he hated the Hebrews so much that he's killing their sons, why would he let these two women talk to him the way they did and live if they strictly disobeyed?
Because the Hebrew women, as the midwife said, were animals, and therefore it was out of their control. So they weren't defying Pharaoh. They were, yeah, what are you going to do?
Yeah. There's a, like I said, there's kind of a debate on this of, would Pharaoh have trusted Hebrews to kill Hebrews versus trusting people in his court? And here's the other thing, why did these two women, why does it say that they saved these babies?
Don't they fear God?
They feared God. Does it say that they loved God?
No?
Gotta define love.
Yeah. I mean, and it doesn't even say because they wanted to be obedient to God. It said they feared God. So I kind of interpreted or look at it like the fear of the Lord was on them. And one of the commentaries I was reading by Dennis Prager was talking about the fact that when those people that did not want to follow out the orders to kill the Jews, a lot of times they weren't killed for not wanting to do that. They were just relocated to the front or assigned a different job. But he would have had no problem killing a Jew that didn't follow his rules. But of his own people, he normally a lot of times reassigned them, so they would be reassigned or redirected if they couldn't get them on board. And so I noticed that most Jewish scholars do not believe that the two midwives were Hebrews. He believes that, many of them believe that since they had such an audience and their names were given, that they were probably just midwives to them. And then it does say, so he commanded all his people. Now it's like, okay, I'm going to take it out of the two midwives' hands. Now he's gone from his own vindictive attitude towards these people. Now he's instructing the other Egyptians, start killing babies. And it's like, he had to first set up this scenario of this fear of these people that he can start getting the people to start doing this. And again, we've seen this through pogroms against the Jewish people. You just don't walk into a group of people and make an announcement, okay, let's just start killing these people's children. You have to build this fear, this resentment up against these people to get people to start killing babies like that. And it even makes me think current day Hamas, the atrocities we saw during that attack on Israel. They were killing babies. What type of spirit, what type of hatred has to have been brewing within a person to get them to the point that we're going to do that? And I feel like this had been revving up to be able to get the Egyptians to agree to do something like that. Jim?
I like that idea that these midwives were Egyptians that had been signed, and that they came to some certain degree of faith in the God of Israel through their relationship with the Jewish people, with the Hebrew people. And it just really speaks to that it's a lot easier to hate someone you do not know than to hate someone that you are friends with, that you know them, they know you, you have a relationship with.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like historically that's, the Holocaust, the Jewish people lived separate from the other people for the most part. There was some assimilation, but it's just kind of like they are the other, we are we, they are the other. So if you look at someone as the other, as not part of us or we, then it's easier to have this hate and carry out these things.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a relationship with someone, you know them, they know you. It seems like that thwarts a lot of that hate.
So the two midwives, did they lie to Pharaoh?
It probably stretched the truth. They may have known one or two ladies like that, so they could technically say, well, the women aren't like that. If you have two, that's your plural. So they weren't exactly 100% tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But,
And the other thing would be, because they had hammered them with so much hard work, the women were in better shape and more likely to give birth quickly and be healthy in childbirth.
Maybe. I think they lied. And do I think that lying is okay
Sure it is.
in this situation? I mean, when is lying okay?
Preserving life.
Yeah, and I don't even think they were doing, it doesn't sound like, I mean, maybe, yeah, they were doing it to save their own life, but also they were saving others' lives. And we think about, like, all the people, and you know, you've got stories of Anne Frank and others, but we think of all the people that lied to hide Jewish people to save their lives. And their lie, obviously, God really liked their lie. God liked their actions because it says he blessed these women for doing this. So, to lie to evil, I think if you're doing God's purposes, I think we take, and Stan and I have debates on lying all the time, when it's okay to lie and when it's not okay to lie. Because I'm more black and white than my husband is, so I have a harder time. But when it comes to saving a life, when it comes to this type of situation, if I ask my husband, do I look fat in this outfit? He's not going to say yes. He's probably lying, but he loves me, right? And so, you know, there's this toss-up of, he believes like if you're dealing with somebody's feelings, but I think in this whole aspect, these women are lying to save the lives of children, and so it's okay.
The truth can be used every bit as evilly as a lie can.
True. The intent, the emotion, the purpose behind, well, I'm going to tell them the brutal truth, and then you rip somebody to shreds.
Yeah.
That's not helpful either, right? So now we're coming down to the birth of Moses. So let's go ahead and dive into chapter 2. Exodus 2 is where we're at. Now, a man from the house of Levi took as his wife a daughter of a Levi. The woman conceived and gave birth to a son. Now, when she saw that he was delightful, she hid him for 3 months. Is there any mother that doesn't think that their newborn baby is delightful? Well, this one's ugly, so I don't think I'll hide it. Or this, you know, no. I mean, you know, I love the fact when she saw he was delightful, because I'm thinking, all moms go, aw, you know. Other people might look at your kid and go, aw. But the moms are always like, this is the greatest thing ever, right? We do. Stan's laughing because we have a friend that's when her mom got a whole lot older, she would go up and she'd see a kid, and let's say this kid was just not a very cute kid. And she'd go, aw, aw. And Julie, my friend Julie's like, Mom, please. It's like, yeah, it was, yeah. So, his mama must love him. But it says, but when she could no longer hide him, she took a basket of papyrus reeds, coated it with tar and pitch, and put the child inside, laid it in the reeds by the bank of the Nile. His sister stood off at a distance to see what would happen to him. Now, she took a basket. Who knows what word that is?
It's an ark. It's the same word as it's used for the ark.
Correct. So again, we're seeing a vessel being placed on the water to save, you know, the people. So we've got that same, again, we're drawing back to Genesis. It's like this story's playing out, but different. We're talking about one family, now we're talking about one person being saved to deliver a nation. So we've got this ark, this vessel of protection from Genesis 6, parallel there. So one of the things I also want to point out before I move on, okay, so mom has decided, Moses has all these women that save his life. And I love his mom. Then we're going to see his sister to get a midwife. Then we're going to see Pharaoh's daughter. And even later we're going to see Zipporah saving Moses' life. We don't see any men stepping up to save Moses' life, but we see these women being used in Moses' life. And again, because it's my birth portion, you know, it's like, I'm a female, and look, females can be used, you know, type of thing. And so I love the fact that we have woman after woman after woman being used in this deliverer's life to save him. So it says, when the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe, while her maidens walked along the riverside, when she saw the basket among the reeds, she sent her handmaiden to fetch it. And when she opened it, she saw a child, a baby boy, crying. She had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrew children." When his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Should I go and call a nurse from the Hebrews to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter told her, "Go." So the girl went and called the child's mother. When Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse him for me, and I'll pay you for your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. After the boy grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she named him Moses, saying, "Because I drew him out of the water." So let's take a look at this. I love. We see here, of course, Moses was a Levite. That's important. Big importance when we get to Emma's favorite book, Leviticus, and the Levite's role. We have this vessel of protection. We show that Moses was delivered, brought through all this, floating above, or floating upon the Nile. The same way the ark flowed upon the flood, he's on the Nile. And both of those places were places of death. If they had not been placed in a secure ark, basket, whatever, those were places of death. The Nile is where they were killing the babies. So he's now being floated above the place that was supposed to be his place for death.
Yeah, she followed the letter of the law. She put him in the river in a basket.
There you go. She just didn't drown him, she
No.
put him in a basket. But this place of death has now become a place of salvation for him. Pharaoh meant to kill him, but his daughter set out to save him. So right now, and this is really cool because I was sitting there thinking, you know, we've got this righteous Gentile in the midst of Pharaoh's court. You know, we see little inklings of where righteous Gentiles step up. And here we see, whether it was the Holocaust of righteous Gentiles saying no to the edict that was going on. I am not going to kill the Jews. I'm going to save them. Now we've got somebody right here in Pharaoh's, not only in the palace, his daughter, who is basically saying, I'm not going to kill this baby. I'm not going to do what my father told me to do. And I just right now want to honor this woman for going against her father, going against evil, and not only saving this child in the water, but then bringing him, the audacity of then bringing him into the palace to live as her daughter. All right. Our son. We saw so many examples when you read stories of the Holocaust of people who would take these children and make them their children to hide them within their own household and in order to save them, protect them. And we see a small inkling, I mean, it's like, we've seen it throughout, but we see this first example, this beautiful example of a righteous Gentile saying, I'm going to save these people. she had nothing in it for her to do that, but danger, right? You-
Well, I was gonna
Two.
say,
Go ahead.
and it says, take this child away and nurse him, and as the child grew, then the mom bought him back.
Mhm.
So it's almost like in my mind's eye, if she had bought him in when she found him in the basket, the Pharaoh may have found that out. May have investigated it a little bit better, but you have this kid that's beyond that age, when he's thinking they're all killed, he would likely not be as apt to check it out to see where the kid came from,
Yeah, we don't know how long this went on,
yeah.
of how long they were killing the babies. We don't know if this went on for years, or if this was just one small time frame that this was happening. I look at more of the weaning process. With the Hebrews, a child would be born, and he'd normally stay with mom until he was fully weaned, which could be 3, before he then actually, if he was a boy, then he went and started tagging around after the men, learning that role. But at first he stayed with mom. And I think one of the cool things about him staying with mom in this, being sent back to his birth home, now under the protection, because he was sent back there by, mom had this time to let Moses know who he was. I believe Moses fully knew he was a Hebrew, because he was there, living amongst them. He knew his sister. He knew his brother. Most of us, and I've run into this problem before, know this story because they watched Charlton Heston in the 10 Commandments. And of course, he was like, what? I'm not a Hebrew, this had been hidden from him. No, I think if he was back with mom until he was weaned or grown a little bit older, he knew who his birth mom was. He probably knew the family. He just was given growing up in the palace gave him the ability, the strategies to do the things that he was called by the Lord to do, and have that influence, have that understanding that he would not have had if he was just out there as a Hebrew slave. I mean, this was such a divine setup. Were you gonna say something, David?
Yeah, just a couple thoughts. So the River Nile in ancient Egypt, that was one of the gods that they worshipped. And so I wonder, Egyptians also being very superstitious people, I wonder if there was an association that the god of the Nile brought forth this child, because it seems odd to me if it was just, okay, it's a Hebrew child, it's going to say, well, there's an edict of destruction on all of the male Hebrew children. So I can imagine that that child was raised up in Pharaoh's household without Pharaoh even knowing it was Hebrew. And I'm just wondering if perhaps, the missing piece, and again, it's kind of like reading between the lines, it doesn't really tell us, but that there was more of an Egyptian religious significance attached to this one Hebrew that kind of changed the storyline. Otherwise, I would think that those in authority would simply take the child away from her and execute him. I mean, if they were really that strong in terms of the edict of killing all the male children. Does that make sense at all?
Well, it's an interesting theory. I think that Pharaoh's house was probably really huge. Most of them probably had additional concubines, wives. I think it was probably a multi-ethnic palace in some sense. She probably, when she brought him in, he didn't look like a Hebrew kid, just the same way when they brought Joseph in before Pharaoh, they'd cut his hair and change his appearance. Mom probably did the same thing. When he was living in the palace, I guarantee you he didn't walk around looking like a Hebrew slave. He looked like the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Whether or not Pharaoh was interested in what his daughter was, we don't even know how many daughters he had. So what the other Egyptians thought about him, it doesn't really tell us. It just tells us for some reason, and maybe it was because it was Pharaoh's daughter and not some other person in the palace, Pharaoh's daughter gets a pass. So if she wants this kid, she gets to have a kid because she's Pharaoh's daughter. And if his identity's been changed and this is something baby girl wants, then maybe baby girl gets it, you know. We don't know. We don't really know the family dynamic. We don't even know if they knew how she had rescued him or how he came into it. We're given the story because we know the deliverance through there. But again, the Nile was worshipped as a place of life for them, which we see later, which is why God turns it to blood, is this place that you're looking for your life and to sustain you. This is also the place that you murdered my children. I'm going to show you the blood. Kind of like here, we hear the ground cries out from the blood that was shed. This river is now a symbol of the blood that was shed. You killed my kids. Bless you. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting, and again, we don't know.
It leaves you, a lot of these stories, it leaves you with more questions than answers, and that's okay. I do appreciate, the level of scrutiny that these Torah classes that you have. It's very interesting discussions that you get into a lot of interesting material because the level of scrutiny, it's like a fine-tooth comb on some of these things, which is good. It's good that you.
I mean, it's like they want you to know the story, but they leave out the details because the more you read, the more you want to know. And I think that's the beauty of how God does his word, is the more you dive in, the more questions you have, the more you want to know, and the more you're going to go to him and say, I don't get this. God, I don't get this. And so you sit and you meditate on it, and you dive deeper into it. And there's, a great author of like fiction books and stuff, or Stan and I will watch a movie and we're trying to get deeper into the plot than what they brought. What do you think the reason behind the heroine this type of thing? This is, filled with, we're going to give you the cliff notes, and now you need to figure out the details or go to the Lord, or are those details even necessary to move that story forward? We just don't know, but you can put yourself in it. That's the cool thing about it. It's like, what would I do if I had been that midwife, if I had found this kid, if I had seen this, if there's always these ifs. And I love that because I really think the Lord wants you to put yourself in if I was in that position, what would I have done? Or if I was viewing that, how would I view it? Or what do I think that person's motives? Because we all love to figure out the motives behind why people do what they do. We think it helps explain. Sometimes evil is just evil. Pharaoh's evil. Why he's evil? Because he's Pharaoh. And he thinks he's God. Right. And we're going to see here really soon that his role gets challenged. Telling him that there's a God that wants these people to serve him. It's like the throwdown, and now the challenge begins. Because he's Pharaoh and I'm God of this land. The nerve that you would want to worship something other than me and what I've set before you. And so but I think he probably wasn't overly interested in the little details of stuff that was going on in his courts. He's Pharaoh.
Can I add something? I think another facet to this is that the Egyptians believed in the power of the gods, plural, right? And so, because this is what we see, this is an element of what we see with Joseph in the favor, is they recognize that Joseph was serving a god that the Egyptians didn't have, but they recognized that he was powerful. And even with the midwives, right? Like it says they feared the God. It didn't say they loved God. They understood that there was a God that was powerful. And it doesn't, Pharaoh, the the part about Pharaoh's daughter, she recognizes that it's a Hebrew child, but it doesn't mention God there. But again, like you're saying, like they see the Nile as having, there's this, there's all these gods that are in control of all these things, and it's like, well, if this child was saved, there's some God that's powerful, and they're like, again, it doesn't say that, but that's their mindset.
Yeah.
Is that there's all these gods that are in control of all these things, and the issue then comes when, so they're not necessarily rejecting the God of Israel, they're just not willing to say he's the only God. Which is where the problem comes in, and which is where, like you're saying, Pharaoh, the issue with Pharaoh, that they won't bow down to Pharaoh, and only to God is what becomes the issue.
Right.
And so which we see throughout all of history, basically, right? And even in the days of Yeshua, right, with Caesar, like and like when it's like the people who are allegiant to the God of Israel won't bow down to Rome,
right?
It's the problem, right? And so we see this thread coming through. And so it's not, the problem isn't that the Israelites have a God, it's that they're not willing to accept all the other gods.
Right.
So it's this power struggle, in some sense, between the gods.
That's really a foreign idea, though. One true God.
Right.
I mean, nowhere in the world was there a concept of the one true God. So that's the power of this story, is it brings a revival to the whole world of the concept that there's actually a one true God.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
and we think about the fact that at this point in the story, we haven't had the Sinai experience yet. They haven't really seen his power. All they know is that there is a God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he made a promise. That's really all they've got to go on right now. They haven't seen the demonstration of his power yet, but they believe in him. And these midwives haven't seen the demonstration of his power yet they fear him. So there is something there without even having, and it's like, blessed is he who believes without seeing type of thing. They haven't even seen the manifestation of his power yet they believe in him. Now, as this story progresses and they start to get to see that, wow, he is more powerful, and the Egyptians will get to see he is more powerful than any of these other gods, especially Pharaoh himself. And we get to start seeing that he does this, I believe, for both the Hebrews and for the Egyptians to be able to see these signs. So I'm going to keep moving real quick here now. Now it came over, I'm in chapter 2 still at the very end. Now it came over the course of many days that the king of Egypt died. So here's the one that's putting everybody to death.
What verse, I'm sorry?
I'm in 23, 2:23. They cried out, and their cry from slavery went up to God. God heard their sobbing and remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He saw Bnei Israel, and he was concerned about them. So it says that he remembered. So here's my question. Did God forget?
Yeah, that bothers me in the verse we read at the beginning too, where he says, looking for the exact language, when God takes notice of you, the end of Genesis, like, was God not noticing? I think it's probably language that is talking about, like, God's decided it's time to act.
Exactly. So, and if we look at even, Joseph said he'd take notice of them, but even when we look back at Genesis 8:1, and it says, God remembered Noah, and then the flood stopped. That memory, that remembering, and I think it was Michael Morales had said this with a writing that he had done, but when it says that God remembers people, it is an action, and it's when it goes from judgment to mercy, like what was happening with Noah. Judgment was going on in the land. Now God remembers Noah, and he breaks in with mercy. Here we have the people being oppressed. When it says that God remembers, he's moving into action now, and he's going to give mercy to his people. And that's really comforting, because it's like when we remind God, remember your people. When people pray to remind God of something, does that mean God forgot his covenants? No, it's basically, God, would you now act? would you rend the heavens and come down? Would you?
And the Lord isn't letting any of us out of here without humility. And so he knows how long it takes to work humility in
Yeah.
humans.
Yeah, and this was a timetable, you know, of all of this had to play out, and then God hears these cries. He had heard their cries all along. It's not like he had turned a deaf ear. It's a timing, and we know that God's not like that on reacting sometimes. People talk about that 11th hour type of thing, like you go through something and then God breaks in. Everything had to be set in motion. Moses is where he's supposed to be, and now it's time to act. Now we're going to take care of it. I'm sure many Hebrews wished he had done it 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years earlier, but it was his timing, and now he was going to go ahead and act. And so it says that he saw B'nai Israel, and he was concerned for them. I love the fact they use that verbiage too. Like it isn't just he saw, he's concerned for them. He legitimately cares, right? So now we have Moses out tending the flock. He's been living there, he's got a wife, he's got a kid, he's happy where he lives, he's doing his own thing. And in chapter 3, he's tending the flock. He's on the mountain of God, so where is he? Okay, what's it? He's at Sinai. And the angel of God appears to him in a flame of fire. Who's the angel of God? Pre-incarnate Yeshua. Appears to him with a flame of fire from within a bush. So he looked and saw the bush burning with fire, yet it had not consumed. And Moses thought, I will now go and see the great sight. Why is the bush not burnt? Then Adonai saw that he had turned to look, and he called to him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he answered, Hineni. So God gives a sign, and he's looking for his people to notice it, right? And Moses noticed this sign, and then the dialogue begins. And it made me think, how many signs are out there that we don't notice that could have been a time to interact with the Lord? I mean, I'm sure there's random, bushes probably caught on fire out there all the time from heat or whatever things, but this one wasn't being consumed, and Moses noticed it. Take notice. And I think that's just kind of like a take notice. Like if God's putting something out there, it's so easy to go, well, that's interesting, and walk on. And I think he was wanting to have an encounter with Moses, so he gives a sign, Moses responds, and then the dialogue begins. And then we have this beautiful thing about, he tells him, come no closer, take your sandals off, for the ground where you are standing is holy ground. So we're starting to see this mountain of the Lord, this holy place. When he comes back to it, people aren't tromping all over this. Like there's a point where he even says, don't touch this mountain or you will die. So God is establishing a touch point, a mountain of the Lord, a holy place right there. And I love the phases, like we see a little part of it where Moses just has to remove his sandals. We'll fast forward, and man, you better be careful because God's presence is on there. So we see a small glimpse, God in a burning bush, and then we'll see later God's presence coming down with a fullness on there. So I love that little parallel there. Then we see the arguing, the pleading. He doesn't want to go. And I just want to point out a couple things. When Moses argues and pleads not to do the task that God wants him to do, which of course God gets angry about it eventually, it does say, come on, dude. My phrase, but so first we see his first sign that he gives to Moses about this. It says, he has him take his staff, throw it down, and it becomes a snake. Why a snake?
Symbol of a god in Egypt is a symbol of a god.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the snake in the garden.
In the garden. It has been their nemesis forever. And here's this snake again. But Moses gets to be a snake handler, in a sense. He grabs a hold of it. He has authority over this evil, over this deception. God's showing him, I'm going with you and we're going to have authority over this thing. Then he puts his hand inside his cloak, brings it out. It goes from, well, I'll just say leprosy because it's easier for me to say, to healing again. And this was another demonstration of healing. What did Yeshua do the most that was a sign and wonder for the people? Healing. This is a sign. Healing is a huge sign to people that, and especially like an incurable disease. So this was a disease that killed people, right? And yet, he's showing that this God that he's walking and representing has a power and authority over sickness and disease. We get to see that inkling. Again, we're seeing these symbolisms that Yeshua had the power over the snake. Yeshua had the power over sickness and disease. We're getting to see Moses start to walk through, in part, what Yeshua walks through in fullness as the perfect Israelite. And then we have he tells him, you're going to pour water on the ground and it'll turn to blood. And this is God basically saying that I've seen the bloodshed and justice is coming in on this. This is how I view it, like showing them water to blood. Your life source is now blood, and it's calling back what's been going on in the midst of this life source, this Nile that they've worshipped, that has been a place of death, and God's breaking through in judgment on that. I'm going to turn your life source to death. And then Moses responds, and it's very similar to our Haftorah portion, which was Jeremiah 1, 6 through 9. And I love reading the Haftorah and then seeing how does this apply to the Torah. But first we see Moses' response. Let's go ahead and do this. Moses basically says, but Moses said to Adonai, and I did skip over Moses, God giving him his identity and his name because we're running out of time. He said, Adonai, I am not a man of words. Not yesterday, nor the day before, nor since have you spoken to your servant, because I have a slow mouth and a heavy tongue. Some people believe it meant he had a speech impediment. So Adonai said to him, who made man's mouth? Or who makes a man mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, Adonai? Now go, I will be with your mouth and teach you what to say. And then we see Jeremiah saying to the Lord in Jeremiah 1, starting in verse 6, then he said, alas, Adonai Elohim, look, I don't know how to speak, for I'm still a boy. But Adonai answered him, do not say I am only a boy, for to everyone I send you, you will go, and I will command you, and you will speak. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you. It is a declaration of Adonai. Then Adonai stretched his hand out and touched my mouth. And Adonai says, behold, I have put my words in your mouth. So we see Jeremiah going, okay, and he moves on with it. We see Moses going, yeah, but please don't make me do this. And at that point in time, Adonai is not real happy with him, and he says, okay, guess what? You're still going to do it, but I'll let somebody else talk for you since you don't trust that I can do this. And so we see this progressive walk. And I was also thinking about, and I'll wrap it up with this, when when Yeshua was in the garden and he wrestled with his final task that the Lord was giving him. His response was not a bunch of excuses on why we shouldn't do it. Yeah, this is going to be hard. And he even said, if you can take the cup away, this, what you're asking me to do is hard. But Yeshua's response to the Father was, not my will, but yours be done. And we also see many times that Yeshua says, I only do what I see the Father doing. I only say what I hear the Father saying. So we see that, and we again see Yeshua walking out the perfect Israelite, submitting to the wishes, the desires of the Father. We get to see it. We get to see Moses learn this. We get to see Yeshua do it perfectly.